as you can see in this map from 1854, since centuries, regulations appeared at some point. They were related more to the damage that was done to somebody's property, and they were concentrated on sanctions, let's say fines for those times. So these were the main rules. Because resources were abundant and population numbers were low, they didn't thought about the impact that had clear cuts on a mountain and so on. For example, Lex Aguila, that was a Roman law issued in the 1st century before Christ, provided compensation to the owners of property that were injured by somebody's fault. This, protecting Roman citizens from some forms of, let's say, theft, vandalism, and destruction of property. For example, damage to the trees was sanctioned with 25 AS coins. That was the Roman currency at that time for each tree. So we can go a little bit, let's say, closer to us. As I was mentioning before, vast covers of forest land and few inhabitants resulted in the lack of forest regulations. This aspect changed when the pressure from human activities on the forest increased. As a matter of fact, at the beginning, the need to give these laws were solely for a practical reason, like the one given by the Ministry of State, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, that warned King Louis XIV that the ongoing extraction of wood from the French forest would threaten French warship construction. And this could lead to breaking the expansion of the empire, of course. His reform was gravitating on the idea of bon usage de la nature. Also the Germans, we can also mention a little bit on the Germans. Starting from 1550, first forest acts appeared in the approximately 350 territorial states that passed numerous forest laws and regulations, from forest management to timber market and wood consumption. Of course, for that time and for that period, we don't think that it was something very complicated, just simple rules for the 16th century. On the territory of today's Romania, the first regulation would appear in the 18th century. And from those that appeared, the most important regulations were given in Transylvania, Bukovina, and Moldova. And I will highlight a little bit the aspects from those times. In 1786, in Bukovina, appeared o rânduială de pădure pentru Bukovina in both Romanian and German language, containing 12 chapters. According to some authors, this is the oldest Romanian forest code. As, let's say, the most important regulation, it was that the forest owner must cut the same amount of wood that was that the forest gives in 1 year, in order to have a balance between growth and harvesting. Like in the case of French Ministry Colbert that I was mentioning before, people realize that if you cut without a plan, this will backfire. Also, for the first time, the notion of management plan is introduced in this regulation from 1786. The next one from Moldova was given by Voivod Alexandru Moruzi, who made a proclamation for forest that after 2 years in 1794 was followed by a regulation for guarding forest areas due to the fact that forest loss in some areas was high. So same thing. First they observed a phenomena, and then they tried to see the causes and, of course, to see how they can correct it. Of course, other instruction regulations were given throughout the years in the regions from the slide. But as I've mentioned before, we can consider these as the most important. So the most important that are here, the ones that are here are the most important. Also, in my presentation is just an overview of the laws. I will not go deeper in some aspects because I consider for our viewers it would be interesting to have, solely an overview of what happened during these years, these centuries. And of course, we just arrived at the time where the first forest code appeared. This is in 1881. So after the half of the 19th century, concerns regarding the development of specialized institutions and a better forest management system appeared. As a matter of fact, first attempt was made by Finance Minister Petre Mavrogheni. He presented a forest code project that fortunately was passed by the chamber, but unfortunately not by the Senate. Perhaps you are wondering why the finance minister proposed the project. It is because from 1871 to 1884, the Forest Service was under finance ministry. Then the second time came where a new project was given for a vote, and it was successful. It was adopted by the chamber on 16th of May, while the Senate voted the project on 9th of May, and then on 19th of June it was promulgated. So the Forest Code was officially printed in the official gazette at that time. Also, I would like to mention that the finance minister in that period where the code was promulgated was Ice Brăteanu, a well-known figure in Romanian history. For almost 30 years, it will be applied by authorities, being the first law from the forest domain. And in this time, it will suffer 2 amendments made by laws from 4th of June, 1892 and 22nd of March, 1896. Like the penal and civil codes from 1864, who had the influence of the French codes, also the Forest Code had a French Forest Code model from 1827. Matter of fact, some articles had similar texts as in the French code from 1827. Also, this is, of course, my opinion, and for sure also the most important aspect of the code was the obligation of management plans before the harvesting took place. So we can clearly see that in those times, forest management plans appeared to have an importance, also in the legislation and also in the field. Then the plans were made by a special commission, and were approved by royal decree. Today, the ministry is in charge of these approvals. However, due to the fact that almost all forest was in private hands, and the ministry didn't have enough personnel to do those management plans, small area of forest was actually submitted or researched with this forest management plan. However, this was the first one, and this led to a development in time, also in legislation regarding these aspects. We are going a little bit in time, in 1910, and on 9th of April 1910, the new Forest Code revokes the one from 24th of June 1881, with the intention to solve some actions that were difficult to achieve, like the obligation for forest management plans for all surfaces. We can notice that this one has 92 articles, so it increased for 46 to 92. First article of the code stipulates that the type of forests that are subject to forest regime, and those are state forest, church forest, private forest from those times. But also forests that have the function of protection, those who prevent floods, landslides, erosion, forests that protect communication routes like railways, public roads, forests that protect riverbanks and the quality of water. Also, because of the constant wars that were in the past and those who will come in the future, forests that protect the defense of the country, so those near borderlines, those near cities, had a great importance in this forest code. If we go to the second article, it describes the conservation of forests, mainly the forest management plan. And chapter 6, it's quite important because it established the guarding and forestry police. So this regulation empowers forest agents and state personnel to guard the forest. Strict rules to be eligible to obtain the job. And an oath was necessary in front of the minister or general secretary or tribunal president. So even in that time, qualified personnel was in charge in doing or in applying the regulation for the forest regimes. Also, for the first time, in chapter 6, felonies, penalties, and sanctions are described, while forest agents are obliged to ascertain the crimes made in the forest they guard. And as you can see also on the slide, guarding and forestry police was stipulated from Article 55 to 58, while felonies, penalties, and sanctions from Article 59 to 76. Then the year of 1918 came, where the unification began. So after the formation of Great Romania in 1918, it took a period of time in order that the Forest Code from 1910 will be applied in all regions. So 3 years later, in 1921, it was applied in Bessarabia, and in Transylvania and Bukovina, it was adopted in 1923. In consequence, the Forest Code abrogated the following laws. So the Hungarian Forest Law, number 31 from 1879 in Transylvania and Bukovina, Austrian Law for Communal Forests from 1897, Austria law for compulsory forest from the same year, also Austrian forest for forest outside the forest regime, and the Russian forest law from 1776 in Bukovina. So some parts of legislation from the former empires applied, but afterwards they were abrogated by the code. Okay, and then, of course, all provinces were forming Great Romania, and due to this, new regulation, new laws, new orders had to be given for a better unity. So on this slide, I would like to underline the main laws that were given in the field of forestry between 1919 and until the communist regime took power. Indeed, for those times, it was quite difficult to initiate forest laws that will proper function due to two main reasons. First, the influence from the laws in the territory before unification. And second, because the forest type was different from the north of the country to the south, from the west to the east. So from 1920 to 1930s, different laws were passed, mainly for forest organization. And I will mention only the one from 1930s, where the first law was for forest administration, implemented by Directorate of the Autonomous House of State Forest and Directorate of Forest Regime. It was a control organism like today's Forest Guard. And then another law was passed in the same year, stipulating the remediation of soil degradation, afforestation, and torrent correction. So as we can see, the lawmakers, the institutions started to see the effects of soil erosion and other factors. And of course, they try to remediate these aspects. Also, there is another couple of laws that were developed before the war, and of course also after the war. An office for sound timber evidence was formed, and it was coordinating the sales of the 15 big forest companies spread it all over the country, because exports were, let's say, having an importance role of the GDP or for those times. Then, after the war, law number 204 was initiated for the defense protection, where Article 1 stated that forest surfaces greater than 2,000 square meters are considered forests. Of course, I would like also to emphasize some facts and figures from the great unification. In 1918, the forest surface increased with 133%. Yeah, this was clear because also Transylvania was in Great Romania, and of course other regions. Of course, during Second World War, due to the war, a lot of areas were extensive harvested for those times. And as everybody knows, after the Second World War, we had to pay these war compensations. And of course, the forest had to suffer again. So because of this, because of the wars, but then again, because some parts of Romania were given, then the forest area decreased. Yeah, after the Second World War. In that time, from 1918 and 1943, 370 normative acts were given, 85 laws and decree law, 25 regulations, and 261 acts in Journal of Ministry Councils. I would like to emphasize the negative part, because when you have a greater number of acts, sometimes you cannot implement them as mentioned in those acts. But the positive part was that they constantly updated the forest law in numerous directions, as I was mentioning before. If we go a little bit, let's say, closer to our time, in the year of 1962, the first code appeared under the ideology of that time, of the communist regime, and stated that all forest was into state control. This led to a unitary way of forest administrations. It had only 51 articles, so with 41 less than the previous forest code. And then, of course, article number 1 states that forest and land cover with forest are all state-owned. Of course, there is also a paragraph in Article 7 that describes the protection and production and special protection function of the forest. So it had some positive effects in this regard, as we will see with these groups. During that time, numerous laws were passed. For example, decree number 201 from May 1953 stated that all wood materials transported on roads, railways, or water must have transport documents or sales documents, and those were a printed standard form. Today, we will see at the end, we renounce on the, let's say, paper printed sheet of paper, and we went online, so to say it. And then also a great importance has the decision number 114 from 1954, where for the first time the forest surface is split into two groups. The first group consists of forests with particularly protection role, while the second group consists of forests with production and protection function. For sure, for the specialists, these words resembles even today with what we have in the legislation. And if we go deeper, the first group divides in 5 areas. So the first one is the forest with the protection function for water. The second area is forest with protection function for erosion protection. The third one is the forest with protection function against climate factors. The fourth one is the forest with protection function for society. And the last one is the forest that is having nature monuments and reservations. I would like to underline that even for today's standards, the classification from 1954 was ahead of its time. And these aspects were included in the 1962 Forest Code at Article 7. Then, after the 70s, we have law number 9 regarding environmental protection, that states that this is a state problem. So environmental is a state problem of national interest. And it covers sections regarding air protection, of course, water protection, soil, subsoil protection. And the last law, let's say, from this slide, is law number 2 from 1987 regarding conservation, protection, and development of forests, rational economic harvesting, and maintaining ecological basis. So in one forest, a lot of aspects are, let's say, implemented from the harvesting side to the protection one. Nowadays, they are a little bit splitted. They go in different direction, but at the time they put all of them in one law. So a lot of objectives, so to say. Also, as before, in the first codes, fines were stipulated, and harvesting instruction was clear, in order that the forest fund will not suffer from those activities. Now we go to the first code after 1989. And this code, let's say, faced the realities of land restitution that started after the year of 1991. And if the code from 1962 had to deal with all forests under state ownership, now this code had to adapt its content to the different ownership categories of forest lands after 1989. Also, first private FMUs appeared with the year of 1999-2000. And also, harvesting activities started to be done also by private companies. Again, the definition of forest fund is introduced in the forest code. And for the first time, it is stipulated that payments for owners for protection forest are mandatory. And we will see that this paragraph also is present, let's say, in the actual code from 2008. So this would be, let's say, those years where, as I said, the ownership regime was in a constant change, and free market appeared in Romania. Then one more aspect that I forgot to mention is that in the Forest Code from 1996, Conservation and Regeneration Fund for Romsilva was created, and the money were used for acquisition of new forest land, afforestation of empty terrains, degraded, and so on. And then in 1998, first modifications appeared to the code by the government decree 96 in order to harmonize all the changes in the legislation that had passed after the fall of the communist regime. So a lot of to mention, but also one important aspect was that the destruction, degradation, or damaging forest areas by owners or other persons, including arson, constitutes forest crime. So, as we will see also in the next code, everything is quite good regulated for those who are doing, let's say, felonies or crimes against the forest fund. So, March 2018, law number 46 was adopted. The same definition for the forest fund as in the code before. Now, also owners, besides Romsilva, are obliged to constitute conservation and regeneration funds. Forest management plans were not mandatory for surfaces less than 10 hectares. And of course, maximum volume harvested per year cannot exceed annual increment. So as I said, this was also mentioned 100 years ago, and it's made after also a lot of research, I would say, nowadays. And of course, clear cuts are on maximum 3 hectares, as it is also today. And then the same thing about protection areas was mentioned, that restriction imposed to forest owners through forest management plans by national parks, natural parks, Natura 2000 sites are made according to the will of the owner or by paying yearly compensations. So I think today, let's say the term is payment for ecosystem services. If we want to, and of course, this PES, payment for ecosystem services, is all over Europe. I think Mihai knows better about what's happening also in other countries regarding compensations. Okay, so another aspect, because a lot of people are wondering or asking themselves if we have strict laws regarding illegal logging in the forest code, in other laws. So I would like to mention that for those that are interested, they can search this or they can find this at articles 106, 107, 108, 109, and 110. So this is the place in the forest code for those ones. So I will elaborate a little bit, or I will make a further detail of these articles. Also, we can, if we look in the penal code, the law 296 from 2009, we can see also there two, let's say, felonies, that forgery and usage of marking devices is under criminal law. So who is doing, let's say, illegal use of the marking devices or is cloning them and so on. And then also for contravention, we have law number 171 from 2010, where it mentioned in detail what are the contravention. And of course, this law is used by the police, the gendarmerie, and forest guards, so control institutions. And I will just mention a little bit on the, just a second, on the articles from the forest code. So the first one is article 106, and it's about reduction of National Forest Fund surface and change in destination. The material object of the felony is Article 1, Paragraph 2 from the Forest Code. The subject of the felony are private or legal entities in form of co-authorship, instigation, and complicity. And the material element of the felony is breach of stipulation from Article 36 and 37 from the Forest Code regarding the reduction of the surface, of the forest surface. Then we have Article 107 that stipulates the cutting, breaking, damaging, and pulling out from soil of trees, seedlings from National Forest Fund. In this case, the material object of the felony is the forest generation from National Forest Fund or outside it. And the subjects of the felony can be the owner or any other person or entity. And it is a contravention if the value of prejudice is not more than 5 times the average price of a standing cubic meter for that time. Regarding the next one, grazing in the forest fund. These measures were imposed to prevent damage of forest vegetation and, of course, soil compactions by the animals who are grazing in the forest. This will, of course, affect regeneration. And as we know, if a forest is compacted, then the seeds cannot, let's say, enter the soil and germinate. And the author of the felony is the keeper of the animals. The owner is cleared of responsibility, but in the case the owner forces the keeper, then it is co-authorship in this felony. Of course, in certain conditions, forest administration can approve grazing and passing through forest land fund, like passages for water, or in case of severe drought is present, then of course some derogation can be given. And then Article 109, this is, let's say, the most common felony, and it regulates the type of tree theft. And the material object is wood products as defined by Article 58, Paragraph 2. So the material element of the felony is taking the wood from the owner without the right to do it. Either it's whole trees or partial trees. This everything that is, let's say, wood material that is taken outside the forest goes into this Article 109. Then we have another article besides this. It's Article 30, Paragraph 1, which states that obligation of artificial regeneration and helping of natural regeneration, this shall be done in maximum 2 vegetation seasons. So exactly, if a clear cut or a windstorm happens, the maximum is 2 vegetation seasons. After that, of course, controls will happen, and the owner of or the administrator will be fined. And I was mentioning before that in the penal code there are 2 amendments that before they were introduced in the forest code from 2018, but then in 2015 they were passed in the text of the penal code, and this is about forgery and usage of marking devices. This is stipulated at Article 317 and 318. So in the case of forgery, it's from 3 months to 1 year or fine. And of course, if you use these forged devices, then it's 3 months to 3 years or fine. So I would say that the legislation is quite up to date, and every aspect can be investigated by authorities, by institutions that have these controllabilities. Okay, so as I was mentioning before, I wanted to highlight a little bit also on the traceability, because it's a hot topic today. We have also an infringement about illegal logging. So not deforestation, but they are saying so in the letter from the EU, it's about illegal logging. So for traceability, we have this government decree 497 from 2020, and of course, in there it's regulated also the usage of SUMAL 2.0, the abrogate from SUMAL 1.0. And it stated that at Article 4, paragraph 12, SUMAL 2.0 system is the basis for the own due diligence system of forest owners, forest administrators, forest management units, economic operators that are using SUMAL 2.0, according to the requirements of the Article 4, paragraph 3 of the Regulation 995 per 2010. So this is the European Union timber regulation. So as we can see also on the left side of the image, this application is used by every, let's say, actor that is having business in the field of forestry or in the field of administration. And of course, it is used by the control organism for a better overview. I don't know if you will have time at the end to present a little bit the features on the website version. We will see. So this was, let's say, a little bit of introduction in the main forest laws since the beginning of implementation of the first forest code to the actual forest codes. I didn't want to go deeper in some aspects, because for sure this can be done on other occasion, and it can be focused solely on those aspects. But as I said, as a general overview for somebody who doesn't know a little bit what happened here, and I think it's quite good. And let's say after all of these years of legislation in Romania, I made just a second, a short, let's say, print screens from the Eurostat. And as we can see that the change in forest area from 1990 to 2020. So after 89 in Romania, the forest surface increased with almost 10%, as they are stating. And then the share of forest in the total country area is, let's say, roughly 40%. Which is still a good thing, as I said, after all this legislation that appeared in the last years. Then another aspect is the growing stock of timber in European Union forest. And as we can see that Romania has a growing stock of almost 20% since the year of 2000. And the share of the total EU stocks from Romania is about 8%, 9%. The greatest growing stock can be found in Ireland, and of course the lowest in Sweden, of course also due to climate condition of the country. And then also a very important aspect is the share of removal of net increment in European Union forest. Perhaps some people will say that, yeah, in Romania we cut more than is growing and so on. But as a matter of fact, if we see this graphic, the average for the European Union, the annual increment for the European Union is 63%. Of the increment was removed by the logging industry, let's say in 2009, as it is stated here. We have removals in 3 countries that exceeded 90% of the net increment. That is Czech Republic. As you can know, so in Czech Republic it's 111. But as you can know, it was the forest from there, it was affected by bark beetle, was affected by windfalls. So then, of course, the value is so high. And then the Netherlands is extracted 96% of the increment, and Germany 94%. If we look at the end of the figure, we can see Romania that is at the rate of 30%, yeah, of the commercialized wood. So that means 70% of the increment still remains in the forest, accumulating also the stocks. And as I said, during these times, the legislation developed, having a lot of directions, from nature conservation to implementation of criminalizing the felonies that are happening in the National Forest Fund. And this, the surface increased. Of course, the growing stock increased after 1989.